Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 15th presentation of Avalanche Canada's webinar series. My name is Brent Strand. I'm going to be your producer for the evening tonight. Nancy Geismar is online with us, and she's going to be moderating and looking out for those questions and comments in the chat box. We're all so stoked to have you guys out tonight. COVID has meant that we're not delivering face-to-face outreach presentations. We're not out there hanging out with the public, and it's a darn shame, you know, but the silver lining in it all is we're able to reach so many people through these webinars. Our mission today is to help and educate all you backcountry users out there so you can go out and play safe, because we want you all to know more, go farther, and come home. So first off, I'd like to thank our sponsors. Without their financial support during these challenging economic times, and working with us to reach backcountry users such as yourself, they're doing a fantastic job out there for us. So first off, everyone, you guys are all muted. If you'd like to ask a question, we can unmute you with the little raise hand button there after, when we get to the Q&A. There's going to be lots of opportunity to do that at the end of the presentations. Another way to ask a question is just type it in the old question chat box there, and we'll pull that out and we'll get that to the presenters. So tonight's presentation is an update on the South Rockies, both the state of the snowpack and the crowdsourcing that we're using to create a better backcountry community out there. Simon Horton, he's going to bring you up to speed with what's happening in our snowpack in the South Rockies. There's some tricky conditions to be aware of out there, and Simon's going to discuss ways to manage these. This will help you make informed decisions now and hopefully down the road this season. Jen Coulter, she'll be talking about the Mountain Information Network and the role that crowdsourcing has been playing in avalanche forecasting and trip planning in the South Rockies regions. We will look at that and what has been going well with the MIN this season and what further community buy-in could do to improve our public safety. So our presenters this evening are Jennifer Coulter and Simon Horton. Already said that. Jennifer's from Fernie and has been with Avalanche Canada and the South Rockies field team since 2012. She also has a side hustle going. She teaches some courses for the Canadian Avalanche Association and instructing search and rescue dogs in avalanche, wilderness, and tracking profiles. While Simon Horton is an avalanche forecaster currently based in Kimberley, he's been forecasting for the past 5 winters, splitting his time between Avalanche Canada and Simon Fraser University Avalanche Research Program, where he does research on computer-assisted avalanche forecasting. This winter, he's been periodically joining the South Rockies field team. They both bring a wealth of experience through the years of avalanche forecasting, collecting data, sorting data, crunching data, and creating models that help recreationists understand what's going on in the conditions and how to best manage those conditions. So they're going to get you some information here so you can have fun and be in a safe day out in the backcountry. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Simon, and I hope you folks enjoy the evening's presentations.
Okay, hey Brett, thank you. And hi everyone, thanks for coming out tonight. I'm excited to talk about the snowpack conditions in the South Rockies. Brent, am I sharing my slides now?
You're looking good.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, as Brent said, I'm based in Kimberley, BC, and I've been joining the field team in the South Rockies this winter periodically, and I've been keeping track of what's going on in the snowpack there. And right now we're in some interesting conditions. There's been quite a few avalanches lately, and looking ahead, it's going to continue to be tricky for the next while. So I'm hoping to have a good discussion tonight and answer some of your questions about what's going on in the snowpack.
Hey, Simon, I just want to ask a couple questions to the audience here. I kind of forgot to put up a couple polls, folks. The first poll that I wanted to ask you guys today is, what is your preferred mode of travel out there in the backcountry? I know we got a lot of skiers, snowboarders, snowmobilers, snow bikers. You know, I'm curious how many people are snowshoers and hikers over down there in the South Rockies region. Looks like we've got a bunch of folks chiming in here. We're just going to try and do a couple polls here just before we get right into it to see who you folks are out there. So the first poll here, how do you get around? Looks like majority of you are skiers or boarders, 74%. We've got a few snowmobilers there, 8%. Snowshoers and hikers, we got 16%. I would assume that's in the snowshoe crowd in the winter here, and a little bit of ice climbing going on down there. So that's pretty cool. So majority of you guys are out sliding on the snow on some sticks. The next one here is, what is your Avi Savvy? Like, what kind of avalanche training do you have out there? Have you attended a little workshop or a seminar or something, or you have none? AST1, you know, got your baseline avalanche education, or AST2, are you really trying to get more education? And then of course there's the pro level, the CAITP program. Awesome, folks. It looks like a lot of you folks have your AST1 and AST2. You know, that's a good percentage of you, over 50%, got some good education going. And then we got 14% of you actually have some pro level training. That's great. Not very many people are non-educated, which is great to see. And then we got one more question here, folks. We're gonna ask you, whereabouts are you from? We just wanna see where you are in the surrounding area to the South Rockies. Man, you guys are keeners. You're good at the vote and getting it filled up pretty fast here. So just so you guys can see there, as our presenters, Fernie area is taking the crowd by 33%. Couple out of Sparwood there, 1%. Crow's Nest Pass a little bit elsewhere in BC, and also looks like the Albertans are looking at it to come out and recreate. So sorry for the interruption there, Simon. I'll hand it back over to you.
No problem, Brett. Thanks. That was cool to see that we have a good mix of people from different areas and different activities. Do I have the controls back now?
Yes, you do, Simon.
Okay, thanks. So I'll start right off by looking at the avalanche danger for tomorrow in the South Rockies regions. And we see between the two forecast regions, we have the Lizard Flathead and the South Rockies. Overall, there's a lot of moderate danger. But there is a standout thing that in the Lizard Flathead, we have considerable danger at the treeline elevation band. And that's kind of the first hint that there's something interesting going on in the snowpack right now. And I think through this talk, we're going to really kind of dig into the current snowpack structure and what the nature of this tricky problem is that's mostly in the Lizard Flathead, but also in parts of the South Rockies have equally tricky conditions right now. So to do this, we're really going to dig into tracking the snowpack, and that's the job of an avalanche forecaster. We really keep track over the course of the season, all of the weather events and layers that form in the snow, how they change over time and across terrain. And we rely on a bunch of different data sources to do this. A lot of information comes from professional reports like ski hills and guides. We also have weather stations and weather forecasts to help fill in information. In the South Rockies regions, we have the Avalanche Canada field team, who's a super valuable to help us go into areas we don't get many observations and fill in our data gaps. And then finally, getting reports from recreational users through things like the Mountain Information Network is becoming a really important part of our forecasting. And I think both through my talk and Jen's talk, you'll really see how these reports help paint a clearer picture of what avalanche conditions are like. So as we dig into the snowpack conditions, I'm hoping this will help you understand the forecast and help you plan a safe trip into the backcountry. In a lot of ways right now, it's been a pretty typical winter for this area. The BC River Forecast Center produces a monthly bulletin on how much snow there is in the mountains. And in their last bulletin, they said the East Kootenays were at 101% of normal. So it's very average amounts of snow. And if you look through the last couple of years, there was a bit more snow at this time last year, but less in previous years. So that means right now in the Lizard Range, there's a bit over 2 meters of snow in a lot of higher elevation areas, and a bit less than 2 meters in a lot of the South Rockies. And with this typical snow depth, we've seen some fairly typical patterns in the layers in the snow and the types of avalanche problems we've had so far this season. As is usual, in the start of the season, there was a couple of rainstorms that formed these crests. And these crusts still exist in the bottom of the snowpack. Some years, deep crusts like this can be a big problem right through the winter, but we've been lucky this year that these crusts haven't really produced big avalanche problems much of this winter so far. Moving ahead into December, we had a bit of a period where a weak layer formed. At least we were worried that it was going to be a big weak layer, but it ended up coming, the storm that buried this layer ended up coming in quite warm. There was a bunch of rain, and it never really turned into a bad persistent problem like they sometimes do. Moving on later in December, there was a bunch of big storms around the holidays in early January. And so with these storms, we had kind of short-lived periods where the danger ratings went up and there was lots of storm slab avalanches. And these problems got better pretty quickly after that. By mid-January, we had the first big dry spell. And during this period, the avalanche danger went low. A lot of the deeper layers in the snowpack gained strength, and they haven't really been a problem since then. And this dry spell is really where the current story starts. What often happens when we have a long period without snow is that the surface of the snowpack is exposed to the atmosphere, and you can get all types of grains or snow grains that form and become a persistent weak layer. Things like sun crusts, surface hoar crystals, which are frost, and other types of weak snow will form on these surfaces, and once they get buried, become a problem. In early February, we had a number of storms that buried this interface and put about 40 to 70 centimeters of snow on it. Then last week, it just got really cold and not much cringed in the snowpack. So we're kind of still sitting with this snowpack structure where we have this weak layer that formed in January, and there's about 40 to 70 centimeters of snow sitting on it. And that amount kind of varies depending where you are in the two forecast regions. And so if you look at the forecast for either of the regions, the number one avalanche problem we have is persistent slabs. And that's this snow sitting above the weak layer that formed in January. With this problem, we currently have small to large avalanches, possible to likely, at all aspects and elevations. And this is currently the biggest problem in the snowpack right now, that if you're heading into the backcountry, you need to think about and have a good trip plan to avoid this problem. And so I'm going to jump into kind of the evolution of this problem and kind of tell the story through photos we've gotten on the Mountain Information Network. A lot of good illustrations of where this avalanche problem exists have come in through people sharing their photos and avalanches and near misses. And it'll really kind of help bring this avalanche problem to life. So in this dry spell in mid-January, we had a weak layer form on the surface. And in particular, in the Lizard Range and areas around Sparwood, this weak layer ended up being surface hoar or frost, which is a notorious bad type of weak layer that can linger and produce long-lasting avalanche problems. By early February, this layer was buried and they were starting to show signs of instability. Here, this is a field team member traveling through some mellower terrain and producing shooting cracks, signs that this layer was starting to become a problem. And it wasn't long after that before we started getting reports of avalanches on this persistent weak layer. And it's really been a remarkable period since then, where almost every day this month, there's been reports of human-triggered avalanches on this persistent weak layer. And if we just go through a lot of the photos of reports that have come in the past 2 weeks, we can start to pick up some patterns in what these avalanches look like right now. So here's a photo, and you can pretty clearly see that this avalanche happened on a layer about 40 to 70 centimeters deep, kind of in line with how deep this weak layer is buried. And this is a pretty common depth and size we've seen in all of these avalanches. Here's 3 more photos, and you can start to get a picture of what type of terrain these avalanches were happening in. You'll see that these are all in open trees around tree line. and kind of a distinct pattern that spots where you might typically think are safe, like in the trees, have been producing avalanches. And that's been one of the tricky elements of this problem, is that it's actually really common in the trees. A lot of the avalanches on this layer have ranged in size between 1 and 2. And by definition, size 2 avalanche is big enough to bury or kill somebody. And a lot of the avalanches have been a bit smaller than that, not quite enough snow to fully bury someone. But given the nature of the type of terrain these are happening in, where there's lots of trees, sometimes cliffs and creeks, they still have potential to cause serious injury. And moving forward, when we get more snow, they could become even bigger. Here's another recent avalanche from the weekend. And then up to just yesterday, we had a few reports of people triggering these avalanches. And these ones are quite notable from Mount Fernie because they were remote triggered. So skiers were just walking along the ridgetop through generally flat terrain. And they just from walking there triggered avalanches on the slopes below. Rather large avalanches. These ones were size 2 and even bigger in some cases. And this is a sign that this weak layer is still very much weak and reactive and easy to trigger. Similarly, this is another photo from yesterday, more from the Sparwood area, where a skier was coming down the right side of this opening and triggered an avalanche here on the far left side. So through all of these reports, we've seen some pretty clear patterns in that human triggering slab avalanches is likely right now. And that's why the dangerous rating has been considerable for the last 2 weeks in the lizard range. There's also a pretty clear pattern that these avalanches have been happening at the treeline elevation band, especially in open trees. This is where the problem has been most evident. There's also been some distinctive characters in that these avalanches have been triggered remotely from lower angle terrain and actually just released on lower angle terrain altogether. Most avalanches happen on terrain that's in the high 30-degree angle steepness, which is similar to a typical black run at a ski hill. But with this surface R layer we have, it's been common to get avalanches in lower angle terrain down into the low 30s, closer to what you get, or closer to the angle you would see on a blue run at a ski hill. So this just means these avalanches are possible in a wide variety of terrain, making it trickier to avoid. So far, everything I've shown was in the lizard flathead region, and it's always a bit trickier to produce forecasts in the South Rockies because we get fewer reports. We rely more on our field team and on people submitting to the Mountain Information Network. At first, we weren't too sure about whether this problem also existed in the South Rockies, but eventually we started to get reports from mainly the Sparwood area showing similar types of avalanches and similar types of terrain, like these two shown here. However, for the rest of the region, we haven't quite seen avalanches on surface ore, but we have seen some other notable activity on layers that are at similar depth. So these two photos here are from the Alberta Rockies, in the Crow's Nest Pass area, both north and south of Crow's Nest Pass. And here you see kind of similar type of terrain. It's kind of open trees, a bit lower angle, and these are both human triggered slabs. In this case, wind slabs, but they propagated quite widely and also sit above some weaker snow that formed during that dry spell in January. So with that, the problem is very obvious and widespread in the lizard flathead region and not quite as widespread, but still exists in the South Rockies region. Throughout this whole period, we've had some questions about what's happening in the Alpine. With conditions being so tricky at treeline, there haven't been as many people traveling into the Alpine, so we just have a bit more uncertainties. But we do have enough information to suspect that the persistent weak layer does exist up there. It just might not be as likely to trigger as it is at treeline. But what adds to the complexity in the Alpine right now is that there are also wind slabs as a problem, meaning there's more snow above any potential weak layer because of the wind, with the potential to produce bigger avalanches in the alpine terrain. And this is one avalanche here from a few days ago in the Lizard Range, just kind of showing that human triggering is also possible in the alpine right now. So these photos kind of show the story of why we're really worried about human triggered avalanches at treeline and why it's considerable right now. And it also highlights that it's a pretty tricky problem to manage. And in the avalanche forecast, we always give some tips and terrain and travel advice on how to manage these problems. But I thought I'd go into a little more detail just based on the specific nature of this problem with some advice for different elevation bands. So starting with the below tree line. Up to now, we hadn't seen too much avalanche activity at below treeline elevations, but now that it's warmed up a bit, we've started to see some signs that there could also be a persistent slab lower down, and that I'd be watching for signs of instability, especially in steep open trees at lower elevations right now. This persistent slab problem could start to become a bigger issue down low. Tree line's definitely the hot spot. We know a bit more about. That's the elevation band where we know the most that human triggering is likely there, especially in open trees and lower angle terrain, and that very conservative terrain selection is needed there still. There's avalanche, the fact that these avalanches happen on lower angle slopes means that there's not as many safe options when you're traveling there. And I'd really recommend knowing that there's a weak, thinking about the fact there's a weak layer roughly 50 centimeters deep that's easy to trigger, and what the consequence would be on a slope if that amount of snow released. Would it push you into trees or over cliffs or into some kind of gully or creek? It's really a problem you wouldn't want to take your chances with. And also this problem is tricky in that you might not get a lot of feedback as you're traveling your way up to tree line. And just because you don't get signs of instability doesn't mean that problem doesn't exist. And even in a professional context, if you do a really advanced snowpack test and do a bunch of pits, it's pretty difficult to extrapolate that from where you dig to a slope that has the potential to have this problem. So it's really important to have extra caution at tree line right now. In the alpine, there's some other concerns. One of the biggest ones I would say is that you'd have to get through the tree line to get there right now. The persistent problem probably exists, but it's less likely to trigger than at tree line. But there is the additional factor that wind slabs will exist and have the potential for bigger avalanches. And I'll just add that over this period, we've had fewer observations from the alpine, so we have a bit of lower confidence in exactly the distribution and nature of avalanche hazards in the alpine. So I thought I'd pose a little exercise here to just kind of put all this to practice based on this forecast and look at this kind of hypothetical piece of terrain and think about spots where you'd want to avoid and spots that you'd maybe consider to travel under these conditions. I'll just give you a kind of a moment to look at some things and think about it. And first off, what would scare me the most would be anything steep open trees around tree line. All of the areas I've circled here look pretty similar to the types of spots we've seen avalanches in those photos I just showed. But in the denser lower angle trees, there might be safer options. Looking up into the alpine, there's a bit of uncertainty about whether the persistent layer exists, but we know that wind slabs are also possible up there. So I would also be cautious of most steep avalanche terrain in the alpine right now too. But you see now that I've kind of circled all these areas, it doesn't leave a ton of great options. And that's just kind of the nature of the conditions when you have a really bad persistent weak layer, that you need to be disciplined and remain to conservative terrain until the problem goes away, or have a lot of tools and abilities to evaluate a specific slope in great detail to have confidence that the problem doesn't exist there. But if you don't have those tools, it's best just to wait out this problem until it heals itself. So I'll take a quick look at the outlook over the next week. And the main story is we see a storm coming starting on Sunday and really picking up Monday. But up until then, there's no big change that's really going to impact the avalanche conditions. We're going to remain really worried about this persistent weak layer up until Saturday. On this storm, we're still a little far out to have details on how much it'll snow, but I'm definitely seeing the potential for 30 centimeters or more, as well as some warmer temperatures, all kind of factors that will likely increase the avalanche danger on Sunday and Monday, especially, and with that, you'd probably expect avalanches on these persistent weak layers. The big question right now is what happens next, and I can give you some ideas and things that we'll be looking out for, but at this point, with this long-lasting persistent problem, it's tricky right now to say what would happen next. What I can say is that we're concerned about these persistent problems for the next few days, and that conditions will get worse with the storm. But I can give some kind of general thoughts on when these persistent problems go away. And a good analogy of a persistent slab problem is like cooking a bag of popcorn. You go through a period when you put it in the microwave or on the stove where a lot of the kernels are popping and you get a ton of activity, similar to the avalanche activity we've had the last 2 weeks and probably over the weekend and into the storm. A lot of slopes are releasing, a lot of kernels are popping, and it's pretty obvious what the conditions are like. But usually with persistent problems, there's a period at the end where there's a few last kernels that pop, and it's kind of hard to say when and where they happen. There's a lot of uncertainty associated with that, which makes it tricky. And these are going to be the questions that we're going to be looking at in the next week or two in these regions. There's a rule of thumb that most persistent problems heal themselves in about 6 weeks. And for this specific problem, we're just about at 4 weeks in, which means it's reasonable to expect this problem to last another week or two. And in some cases, they can be worse and last longer. So that just kind of means we're not sure yet what's going to happen. We'll just have to kind of hang on and see. And to do that, the best advice I can give is to get the forecast each day you head out for the most up-to-date information and go through the daily process of before the trip, making a trip plan based on the forecast, checking your avalanche gear. Then when you're in the field, verifying conditions, using good travel habits, evaluating slopes, and especially with these persistent slab problems, the slope evaluation becomes really important. And at the end, reflect on your day. Those are the daily processes that always works well, no matter what the conditions. So with that, I wish all of you guys a safe winter, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Hey, thanks, Simon. I do have a question. It relates to how long persistent slab or persistent layers stick around. Is there a certain amount of snow that will crush a weak layer, for instance, surface ore, or does the temperature need to warm up, or is it really just time?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a bunch of different factors that influence that evolution. Depth certainly plays a role. Once they get buried deeper, it becomes harder to for a human to traveling on the surface to stress that layer. But there's also factors, such as the temperature, the density of the slab. And also the number of avalanche cycles there have been on that layer. There's been lots of storms. Eventually, every slope in the mountains that had that layer will slide. Sometimes they can reload, but this general rule of thumb of 6 weeks seems to apply especially for surface soil layers and sometimes facets on crusts and sun crusts. But for deep persistent slabs, which are a little different, they're on weak layers that form near the ground at the bottom of the snowpack. And they're more common in the shallower snow climates like the Rockies. And the South Rockies often have this problem. Those problems can last all season long. If they don't, that 6-week rule doesn't apply to them as much. And a big thing we put weight on too is just reports of avalanches and snowpack tests. And we can't really rely on any time or depth of rule. It's just staying tuned to avalanche observations and what that specific layer is doing in the field.
Great, thanks. And one more question regarding wind slab. How long does it take for wind slab to heal or not be a problem anymore?
Yeah, that's a good question too. They're most reactive when right after they form, but they can linger a bit longer. It somewhat depends on the temperatures and what kind of layers they sit above. So those wind slab photos I showed from the Alberta Rockies, those are wind slabs, but they're sitting above weak faceted snow. And those types of wind slabs can last quite a bit longer, like a few weeks. Whereas a typical wind slab that just sits above some compact powder, I can't give it a specific date, amount of time, but they're more on the scale of a few days to a week.
Great, thanks. That's all I've got from my end. Oh, wait, no, sorry, there's one more. Just came in. Can you explain rounding and the process of crystals moving from their various types to rounds?
So rounding is a process that kind of changes the shape of the snow grains. Typically when they fall as snowflakes, they're quite pointy. They're those pretty hexagon shapes. There's stellars and needles, all types of interesting shapes. And with and so over time, these crystals will change shape, and it largely depends on the temperature and the temperature gradient in the snowpack. So at warmer temperatures, snow crystals tend to round out and form a round shape. And with that, they tend to form lots of bonds and form stronger layers of snow. Whereas if it's colder, they form more square shapes with sharp edges, and these types of crystals don't hold together as well. And that's more of a weak type of snow.
Great, thanks. One has to do, this next question has to do with the MIN report. It says, within the past week, a MIN report that included an incident is no longer on the South Rockies area map. A photo from this report was used in your presentation, left screen side of the Meanwhile South Rockies, very pertinent report. So I'm not quite sure what the question is. Maybe the incident's no longer there. I'm not sure about that.
That's, I guess, more of a technical question of viewing MIN reports on the website. There are different options in the date range of MIN reports you see when you go onto the website. I think by default, it's usually showing reports in the last 3 days. So depending on what you set that, you can move the time back to 7, 14, or 30 days and see older reports. That might be what happened there.
Okay, great. Another question. Do you have an ideal storm in mind for what would most quickly dissipate the danger?
Yeah, it's a lot of snow and warmer temperatures are the best for this type of problem. It'll add a lot of load to the weak layers and kind of help them get crushed and get stronger, and also just produce a lot of big avalanches that there's no real slopes left for that where that weak layer exists. At this point, we don't know whether the storm coming on Monday will be big enough to do that. In terms of backcountry safety, it would be easiest if the storm brings a lot of snow and it's wet and warm, and then afterwards we'd expect things to improve rather quickly, but that might not be the case.
Okay, great. Another one here. The Elkford area has not seen any of these slides or any slide activity. The awesome South Rockies team has been out a lot, but have not found the layer. Does this mean it's likely not there, or is it just really buried? What hazards should we watch for?
Yeah, the Elkford area is one that the South Rockies team travels to a bunch, and we do see some wind reports come from. From what Jen might be able to give a bit more detail about that area because she's probably been there more recently. But I would say that in this area, the layer is not as deep as it is in the Fernie area, and that the character of the weak layer, it's not, so the surface hoar itself is less common, but there might still be other weaknesses in the snow at those depths. Do you know, Jen?
Yeah, I think you did a good job there. It's important to remember that we probably only get to Elkford about once a week, so our sample size is pretty small. I did notice that there was an AST2 course that went on in the Elkford area recently, and they weren't able to find any surface hoar in that area, which may explain why there haven't been as many human-triggered avalanches as we've seen around the Fernie area, but they did note that there was a layer of facets there, and it wasn't producing snowpack test results in that one location. But we always do kind of have to be careful when we're extrapolating from very few data points. You know, if I was to think about where surface hoar would be most likely in Elkford, it would be kind of maybe in avalanche paths along the Elk Valley. And we don't have very big sample size in from the Bull River too, if you're actually going all the way across to the Bull River drainage. There could be surface hoar there. We just don't know yet, but definitely there would be a faceted layer there too, but maybe just not as reactive to human triggering. So yeah, small sample size, but we've been looking for it and haven't found it. Whereas in the Fernie area, you know, everybody's been finding it. So.
That's a great segue, you guys, for Jen. Thanks. Thanks, Simon.
Okay.
Thanks, Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Jen.
All right, I'm just getting hooked up here. And Brent and Nancy, do you see my slide there?
You're good
Looks
to go
good.
there, Jen.
Awesome. Okay, great. So Simon gave us a little update on the snowpack, and now we're going to just talk a little bit about how we can kind of crowdsource for a better backcountry community, hopefully using the Mountain Information Network. So to do this, we're going to talk a little bit about what the field team does and its limitations. And then I'm going to dive a little bit more into what data sparse means, because we've thrown that word around a bit here. We'll talk about how the MIN can help us all and our particular communities wherever we're recreating in the South Rockies regions. We'll talk a few common barriers to people posting and what some of the holes are, what's the needs improvement sides for getting more MIN posts. And then we'll just kind of wrap up with what the MIN says about our snowpack right now. You know, we've already been introduced to Simon, who is an avalanche forecaster and researcher and has been helping us in the South Rockies program in the field as well this year. I got introduced as well, but I just wanted to say a big thank you to Lisa Larson and Les Crawley as well, who are members of the South Rockies field team, and also an extra big thank you to Tech, who supports the South Rockies field team as well by sponsoring Avalanche Canada. So it's interesting to note that actually not every forecast region has a field team, and the South Rockies has one, the Yukon has one, and the North Rockies has one. And I just need to move something, sorry. So the role of these teams is to travel around these data sparse areas on sled and skis so we can gather the avalanche weather and snowpack conditions information to make those better bulletins. And Simon already let us know that we cover actually 2 separate forecast regions. Oh, just having some technical difficulties, stand by. Right, here we go. We have the Fernie region that some of you guys obviously know the areas around Fernie, but Corbin is another popular area. And then we have the South Rockies forecast region that's quite diverse. Places like Castle Mountain, towns like Sparwood and Elkford are represented, Crow's Nest Pass in that region. And this is actually over 12,000 square kilometers of data sparse terrain. We have really big forecast regions in Canada, much bigger than a lot of the ones you'd see in the States and definitely bigger than Europe. The team also shares information directly to the public when we're in the field through social media, like on Instagram and Facebook. As well, we make posts in the Mountain Information Network. And beyond just kind of sharing the conditions we find in the field, we also try to model the terrain and travel advice that you would see in the avalanche forecast that we think is kind of appropriate for the conditions as well. So I think it's kind of important when we start talking about the MIN to understand the process, and Simon actually did a good job of explaining it. Generally speaking, the avalanche forecasts are actually created in Revelstoke, the head office there, by office-based forecasters, and they're generally writing like 4 different avalanche bulletins at once. And this year they're actually working at home, but normally they would all kind of be in an office and have meetings together. And they do that by gathering that information from professional observations from a private industry exchange that has input from local commercial operators like snowmobile companies and cat ski, heli ski, and ski hills, as well as highways programs. And then luckily they also can draw upon weather stations for some information that are maintained by resorts and highways and so on. Yeah, so that's generally the process of how the forecasts get built. But if we look at our forecast regions that are down in the kind of southeast corner here, this is actually what you're looking at here is just an internal resource. All of these gray areas are actually just forecast regions, and all of the dots are weather station resources that we have available to us. And you'll see that there's really none in the South Rockies region at all. There's maybe some information that's missing that comes from Castle Mountain Resort there, but pretty much a black hole. And then you see a clump here in the Fernie area. We're really lucky to have the support of Fernie Alpine Resort, Fernie Wilderness Adventure, Island Lake Lodge, to give us kind of weather and snowpack information. But they're all clumped right around Fernie, and that's kind of all within 20 kilometers of each other in this huge region. So it's kind of a black hole outside of the Fernie area as well. And that's kind of why we as the field team, we are the weather stations essentially, and we are the data collectors, and we are the ones gathering the information from avalanche occurrences and things. But you know, we actually only work 4 days a week, and the areas are so large that we can only get to, you know, Crow's Nest Pass once a week and get one kind of sample from there. So there's limitations even to what a field team can do. And that's where we're leading with this presentation, is how we really need to recruit you to help us solve this data sparse problem as well. So now we're going to talk about the Mountain Information Network. And right now, I'd love it if Brent would put up this slide. I'm just interested in knowing, I have some guesses, but knowing kind of how many people have heard of the Mountain Information Network. I just kind of want to know how many people this is new to, essentially, when I'm talking to the audience here. So the idea behind it is it's kind of a sharing platform designed for trading current conditions, and you find it on the Avalanche Canada website or on the Avalanche Canada phone app that you can download. And it's actually designed to be used by both public and professionals, so it's a really open platform. That's great. So the MIN has been around for a few years now, and it looks like the word's really gotten out that, hey, this is a thing, and I can use this Mountain Information Network. So it's great to hear 87% of people have actually used it. Or sorry, have actually know what it is. We'll find out how many people have used it here. Okay, so the MIN works in a few different ways. And the first way that people usually think of using the MIN is to get information from the Mountain Information Network. You can actually zoom in on the map, and all of these blue dots are actually different MIN posts. And if you see ones that have a number in it, this isn't actually a live link of the website. If it was, you could zoom in closer, and then 5 MIN reports would be under that. So you can actually click on one in an area you're interested in, and it will pull up a MIN report that somebody has written for that local area. So for the next poll that Brian will put up, I would love to know if you have ever gone to avalanche.ca and clicked on one of these buttons to observe a MIN report before. Yeah, especially maybe in planning a trip, like you're deciding where you're going to go riding, so you check out the MIN posts in that area. Just interested in knowing if you've looked up MIN reports before. Sweet. Okay, so a lot of people are using the get information feature from the MIN posts. That's really good to know. So since there's so many people that are actually using information from the MIN, I thought it might be worth it to show you a couple tricks that I like. So, you know, I used to, in the old days, just kind of click on one of these things and look them up and then move to another one and click on it. But the MIN has actually been really productive and quite busy, especially in the Fernie area this year. And I find it hard to keep track of what posts I've clicked on and which ones I haven't yet. So like Simon kind of mentioned, there's actually a filter up here in the corner, and you can set it. So let's say you're coming from Kimberley for a ski tour in Fernie. You don't normally travel in this bulletin region. You might actually want to have it set to 7 days or 14 days to get an idea of what's been progressing, what's been happening in the snowpack over a period of time. But maybe you're more local and you've been keeping up with what's going on in the snowpack day to day. Maybe you only want to have it set for a day or two, and then it's easier to kind of sort through the relevant MIN posts. Something that I actually use all the time is I go to the Backcountry Resources tab under the Mountain Information Network and click on this list view. And I find this a lot easier because I can, especially when there's a lot of data pieces, I can actually pick my forecast region, set the dates that I want, and set it in chronological order. And it's just easier for me to keep track of what I've checked off and what I haven't. So I'll just click on one, read the report, then use the back button and come back to my list. And it just helps keep me organized. So something to try out if you haven't already. So the next feature of the MIN is kind of the give information part. And this is where you actually create a report and submit your observations to share with the community. You know, the whole thing kind of falls apart if we're all getting information from the MIN, but nobody's actually submitting information to the MIN. So this is our last poll for a while. I'm interested in knowing how many people who are online today have actually submitted a MIN report before. So you've used the give feature of the min. So I actually did a similar poll a few years ago in an outreach presentation. So I'm just kind of interested in, it's very unscientific, but kind of comparing the results. So far I can see that actually more people have heard of the min and have been using it to give information. And okay, so we've got 34% of people who have submitted min reports and 66% of people haven't. So that's kind of a bit of the goal of this presentation, is to hopefully get more people interested in actually submitting information, not just using the information. So there's always information there for us to use, and get people a little bit more comfortable with that. Awesome. Okay, so sorry, that was just what the Create a Report tab looks like. We'll talk about that in a minute again. So just trying to convince more people to give min reports, like why should we do that? How does it build a better community? Why should we give more information to the min? So one reason is that avalanche forecasts really cover diverse mountain and weather environments, and the avalanche danger could be higher than posted in some parts of the region and potentially lower in others. I don't have to tell you guys that live in the Crow's Nest Pass that, you know, the snowpack at Castle Mountain may be extremely different from the snowpack in Elkford and Coco Claims, for example, even though they're in the same forecast region. And likewise, the Lizard Range has a very different snowpack than, let's say, the west-facing slopes up against the Divide in Corbin, places like Rain Gauge. But if we have some min reports, it can help us kind of refine the initial information that we have in the bulletin and get a little bit maybe of a picture of more slope-specific or drainage-specific information. From there, you know, of course, we still have to verify those conditions when we go into the field, but the min can help kind of solve some of those puzzles of, okay, where are the hot spots? Like Simon was talking about, we have this kind of hot spot around Fernie, you know, and the min having that slope specific and drainage specific information can help with that. So it's really nice when we have those kinds of min reports. Another way that kind of sharing is caring is that Avalanche Canada field teams, I mentioned, we report to the min every day that we're on shift, but we only work 4 days a week and can't be everywhere at once. And even though, like we said, you know, we may go up to Elkford once a week, well, avalanche conditions change quite rapidly sometimes. And it's definitely more than once a week when we have active weather. So we really need observers like you guys to let us know what you're seeing, where you're riding. And the public avalanche forecasts are best when they have a steady stream of information. And so we can all kind of as a community have a hand in making sure that we're feeding that information stream as much as we can. And then this one is one that's really been taken up by the Fernie crowd, especially in these really tricky conditions, is the min gives us all the opportunity to kind of crowdsource potentially life-saving information around changes in conditions, avalanche observations, and near misses. So, you know, when we're seeing things like shooting cracks starting, you know, that could be really important information to get into the min that night, because people could then look at it and know, oh, there's more snow on the way, that problem's going to get worse and more dangerous the next day. And we certainly can see that kind of progression, that people have kind of embraced that in the Fernie area right now, you know, following along from shooting cracks to, you know, when they're able to ski cut bigger avalanches, all the way to sharing some of their near misses. And those kinds of posts can be really powerful and can be viewed by people doing research as part of that daily process into their next day's travel. And I think the community can feel really good about sharing that information. I think another way we can all kind of promote a better backcountry community is to kind of destigmatize and open up about our near misses. I know a lot of you might already know this, but about 5 years ago, when the min was quite still newer, our South Rockies team actually had our own near miss. nobody got buried, but we triggered an avalanche that wasn't expected, and enough to inflate an airbag. And what we really did is we kind of pushed ourselves to make sure that we got a min post out that night and let people know what was going on with the current avalanche conditions. And we had to kind of get over our own egos and fears that people might criticize us and kind of judge us for this near miss. But in the end, we thought it was more important to kind of show an example of destigmatizing this and getting the word out in a timely fashion so that it could affect people's trip planning for the next day. And I kind of like this quote, it's nice to learn from the mistakes of others. You can't live long enough to make them all yourself. And I don't know about you guys, but I definitely make mistakes, like lots of mistakes in my daily life. And I would like to learn from other people's mistakes so I don't have to make them all. And sharing incidents is a good way to do that and near misses. I've actually been really impressed at the local community this year because Simon talked about that kind of reflection as part of the daily process. And this is something that we do as a field team all the time. We kind of reflect on our day. We actually have a sticky in our truck. It's where we do our debrief on the drive home. And we're always asking ourselves questions like, did we get away with anything today? You know, we skied a 35-degree slope and it didn't have an avalanche. But is that because we got lucky or is that because we made a good decision? We'll talk about, you know, where we were at most risk during the day, if we ever made each other uncomfortable with our decisions in the day. And we'll also talk about good decisions we made in the day as well. And I've seen some really incredible self-reflection in the min that people are kind of using it as a debrief tool where they're talking about, hey, these are the kinds of things that we did to mitigate risk or to make good decisions during the day. And here's some places where we got sucked in to making a mistake or two. And there's been some really good self-reflection in there that, you know, when I read it, I still learn something from it. And I think others can too. So, you know, really good work to those of you who are embracing the use of a min, not just if you have a near miss, but even just making a min post at the end of your day, kind of as a self-reflection tool as part of that daily process. So that kind of brings us to, we talked about a few good things that have been going on. We've definitely seen an uptick in min use. I think Brent was telling me the other day, he'll correct me after this presentation if I'm wrong, but you know, overall in Western Canada, we have twice as many min posts at this time this year as we had all year last year. I mean, understanding that we finished in March last year. And I've definitely seen the difference in Fernie, especially during, you know, this kind of spicy period. But there are some sections we need improvement in. We really do need more posts from the South Rockies. We have a few people that are really good at sharing information from the South Rockies. So good on you for those of you who've been submitting mins, not talking to you. But we have, unfortunately, seen really full parking lots in places like the Crow's Nest, even areas like Elkford, and you know, we just don't get as many min reports there as we would like to. And I mean, I take some of that on personally. I think that we have to, you know, as a field team in Avalanche Canada, kind of still keep building trust with different communities to make sure they know how valuable they are to us. And I also, you know, have a suspicion that a lot of people kind of feel a little bit intimidated to make a min post. They think, you know, I'm not an avalanche expert. I don't have enough expertise to write anything in the min, so I'm not going to post. Or I didn't trigger an avalanche today, so I'm not going to make a post. And that's kind of the second thing I think where we could do a little better as a community is, you know, when things are spicy, we get lots of posts, but it's really also nice to get posts to know where the problems are not. You know, that's just as important as knowing where the problems are, and hearing about good days where nothing happened is also valuable information. And I think it would be great to get some more of those posts. So if you're new and you don't feel like I have enough expertise to submit to the min, I'm here to tell you, you do, and we still need you. So, you know, just information like how much new snow or was there any new snow? You saw me put up a post saying, we don't even really have any weather data from some places in the South Rockies. So, you know, just validating the forecast, somebody out in Coco saying like, yep, those 5 centimeters of new snow over the old tracks from yesterday, that's really important information. Or it didn't really snow in Elkford today, also important information. Information like what were the winds doing? I mean, snow and wind are the main drivers of avalanche problems. So that's why we always want that information. But let's say you're kind of coming from Lethbridge and it's your first time riding in the Crow's Nest Pass, and you know, you're turned around and you're like, I don't know which way the wind is blowing from. No big deal. Even if you're able to just kind of look up and say like, yeah, I see blowing snow today, or wow, those clouds are moving really fast, and write in a min report that that it was windy that day, or snow was blowing around in the bottom of the bowl. That's important information. You don't have to know wind speed and direction perfectly. Signs of recent avalanches are obviously great, but saying I didn't see any recent avalanches, that's also really valuable information that can really help out the forecasters. And I'm going to go ahead and just cross out Snowpack structure there, because you know, if you are a recent AST graduate and you're super keen to be practicing your snow pit results, sure, give us that information. It's really valuable, but it's not at all required for a useful min post. So if you're someone who doesn't know a lot about snow pits, don't worry about it. If you could tell us just some of those top things and include some photos, those would be really useful min posts. So if you're new and you've been thinking about posting but a little bit nervous, you know, maybe give yourself the challenge to sign in and just use the quick report tab. It's kind of the default, and you don't have to remember all the things I said because it'll kind of walk you through a few things you could write about. And then you have the option to put a few comments. Even what riding conditions were like could be valuable, and definitely include a few photos. That's really excellent. And I just have an example of a photo here that, you know, doesn't have any technical, it's not of a snow pit or anything, but there's actually really important information here that a forecaster might be able to take out of this photo just of the riding conditions. You know, maybe you could see, oh, well, I see that skies were pretty clear that day, so the sun was out in Elkford. That's important to a forecaster. Maybe they'd be able to see that there was some cross-loading in some of these upper slopes, that wind had kind of gotten to that. Maybe that helps them validate part of their avalanche forecast from the day before. Maybe they see signs of an old avalanche there, but they recognize, okay, well, that's not fresh. That makes sense from the last cycle. And then there's other details like, wow, these trees have snow on them still. So obviously it was windy kind of at elevation, but the winds weren't strong enough to get in down to the base of the bowl. There's still some sheltered areas. And obviously from the powder the rider is kicking up, you know, there's still soft snow available for transport in some places, or good riding in sheltered areas. So that's just an example of how a non-technical photo could end up being really useful. I think another reason why people are sometimes hesitant to post to the min is they just don't want to give away their secret stash. And maybe Nancy can post one of our blogs from there that talks about what we can do when we don't want to give away our secret stash, but we still hear Avalanche Canada's plea for more min posts, and you kind of want to help out. But like, you're just like, yeah, there's no way I'm going to give up the secret stash of like where I work to kind of build a trail into. And yeah, I don't really want everyone following me in there. The Coles notes of it is, if you feel really strongly about a few special areas, but you still want to give information to Avalanche Canada, like for example, maybe this area here, you've got your, you know, special spot. You could actually just place your geotagged pin in Sparwood instead of your secret spot. You know, it's close enough. It's nice to have the geotag in an exact location, but if it's too telling for you, if you think about how vast our forecast regions are, it's still going to be close enough to provide kind of timely and relevant information to others and the avalanche forecaster. And you can still actually include some details like aspect and elevation if they're important in your description, rather than the forecaster trying to pull it from the geotag. So another example might be, say you ride in Corbin, but you have a special place there that you like to go that not everyone knows about. You could just put your pin in the Corbin staging area, for example, and then that would still be really helpful. So yeah, don't let that kind of secret stash thing hold you back from making posts. And then I kind of just quickly wanted to talk about social media versus the min, because we're starting to get some people that will tag us in their social media posts. Here's an example here. Avcan South Rockies is our is Instagram, and you could also tag us in Facebook. And this is, there's a lot of reasons why that's great. We get kind of notified of it, and it's timely. It can be shared almost as soon as you're in cell reception. It's low friction for people because, you know, we're all kind of addicted to our phones and a lot of us social media. So it's easy to do, whereas kind of posting to the min feels tough. And it also reaches the people that are important to you, your communities, and you probably care about their well-being, so you share it there. So that's ways that it's really good to post in social media. The downside, and it's not really a downside, it's more of a and, not an or, is the field team doesn't work 7 days a week. So when we're on days off, sometimes we're trying to take breaks from work or being on social media. So the information might not get to us in like a perfect, as fast as we want it to. And then also there's a lot of you that have really good information on your feeds, but we can't follow everyone, and neither can the Avalanche forecasters, because that's just a lot of people to follow and a lot of data to sort through. But if we can actually put it on the min at some point as well, on top of having it in social media, it's really great because not everybody is on social media. So even as a trip planning tool, instead of me having to look at 100 people's social media accounts, if I want to go do a trip plan in Corbin, I could just go to one place, to the website, and look on the min, and I know that that information is there. And then the forecasters, they are looking at the min a minimum of once a day, usually more than that, so information kind of won't get missed. So tag us 100%, please, on social media. Keep doing it. But when you get home and you're a little bit more comfortable, it'd be really great if you could kind of dump that information into a quick min post as well, and make sure that the whole community has the opportunity to see that information. Okay, so let's kind of just wrap it up quick because it is late. I think Simon covered a lot of this stuff already about just kind of what the min is saying about our snowpack right now. We have lots of localized data points available for your trip planning as part of that daily process in the, especially in the Lizard Range Flathead region. So use them for your trip planning. And there's probably 40 of them referencing the surface horror layer specifically, and much of it is class 1 data or actually avalanche observations. So kind of like Simon suggested, even if you're going out there in the next few days and you're digging a profile and you're like, oh, I'm only getting results in the hard range, so maybe it's not that bad. You should really be weighting those avalanche observations. That's really high strength evidence that there is a big problem there, more than we would weight kind of that snowpack information at this point in time. So yeah, there's a lot of information there to help us make decisions about what terrain we choose. Like he said, the vast majority of the posts have really similar terrain features to help us in our trip planning. And I think something else that's kind of come up is it's really probably good to discuss with our ski touring partners or our sled group before we go into the terrain. What exactly does conservative terrain choices actually mean when there's a persistent slab problem? Because conservative terrain could mean different things to different people. If I'm used to skiing 45-degree terrain in the ski hill all the time, 35-degree terrain probably seems pretty mellow to me. But when we have this persistent avalanche problem, we need to pull back even further because, like Simon mentioned, these avalanches can definitely trigger in kind of 30-degree terrain things as well. So that doesn't necessarily leave a lot of options. And I actually like to use some trip planning tools like FatMap or Gaia use the slope angle shading, it's really kind of good to see that some of the terrain that I think is like mellow actually has quite a bit of terrain over 30 degrees. And that maybe might right now make me make a different trip plan, because the options are so limited and the consequences are getting pretty high of making a mistake. And then we kind of talked about this too. I kind of think that the cold weather has essentially pressed pause in the healing of these weak layers. You know, not much was happening if the typical persistent slab problems take about 6 weeks to heal. Not much was actually happening in the last week and a half of this Arctic outbreak under those types of conditions, I think. So yeah, I also remember, although it gets less and less likely, the last time we had a persistent slab problem kind of in the Fernie area, it was a month to the day after it got buried. We had our biggest avalanche accident that resulted in some serious injuries and a SAR call out. And I even remote triggered the persistent avalanche problem 2 months after it was buried in a very isolated piece of terrain. But there's something that we have to think about for quite some time to come, even if it starts to be more of an isolated problem. And then the last thing I think I see in the min is that wind slabs over facets, or that sugary cold snow, is going to take longer to heal than we're used to, and could propagate a little wider than we're used to. So like Simon mentioned, those wind slabs that usually move from kind of reactive or easy to trigger more into the stubborn range in just a couple of days might take more like a couple of weeks right now. So that's something I would be keeping my eye on. And yeah, I think it's kind of a abrupt ending here, but I'd like to thank you guys for spending a late night with us. And yeah, I definitely encourage you, if you're having problems with the min or have any ideas how to get your community more comfortable with posting, shoot me a note on social media, or someone at Avalanche Canada, and it'll get to me, and I'll try and help you specifically, because I really want our community to feel empowered to give information. Thanks.
Hey, that's awesome, Jen. Thanks. Simon's been busy answering questions in the chat box, which is awesome. There's one question that has come in that several people might have. Can you create a min offline that uploads when you get coverage? I always want to create one, but forget by the time I'm back with coverage.
Yes, so that's a really great question, and I think you actually can. I'm gonna actually have to, I would actually have to try that, because just the cadence of our workday, we're usually coming back and not using our phone app, but we're using the, actually using the web browser to do it. But I do know you can save drafts and things quite easily. So I'm pretty sure that you can create one offline on your phone and then submit it when you're in cell reception.
Yeah, just to verify there, ladies, yes, you can do a report. It'll cache it in your phone. When you do get into cell coverage, though, you'll have to submit it again once you get into that range. But you can do all that information so you don't forget it out in the field, puts it in a cache, and you just resubmit it. And sometimes some phones will do it automatically for you, but I know mine, I have to resubmit it once I get into cell phone range. And you can store a whole pile of them if you want, if you're being a keener out there that day.
Yeah, thanks for verifying that, Brent.
Great, and then there's another one, it's more snowpack related. So for either you or Simon, the question, in the South Rockies, east side of the Rockies Castle, we don't have a lot of surface hoar, but we have a lot of faceting due to the cold week. With the storm coming, is that something that's going to be a bigger problem?
I think that's a really great question, and I think the answer is inevitably yes. It's going to be a problem. How long that problem will persist is a little bit of an unknown. So normally when we get fresh snow on an old surface, you might see it listed as a storm slab problem first in the avalanche bulletin. And then if it kind of ends up lasting longer than storm slabs would, so it's not healing up kind of in the time frame storm slabs would, it'll end up, they'll end up switching it to a persistent avalanche problem. And it's not just surface hoar that causes problems. Faceted snow, especially facets on a crust, an old wind crust or an old sun crust, those kinds of things can definitely be problems and something to look out for on the east slope of the divide. So that's a really good question.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, you guys. Thanks to both of you.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't know if there's any more questions. Everyone could, does Brent come back? What happens now?
Now it's excellent. Thank you, Jennifer and Simon. That was fantastic presentations tonight. Simon, thank you so much for getting us up to know on what's happening in the snowpack. And as you can tell by his presentation, things are quite variable depending on where you're playing out there, folks. So really pay attention and think about where you're going. And then Jennifer, like who doesn't want to be part of that Mountain Information Network social community, the MIN. And one thing that wasn't mentioned, you know, we do give out prizes weekly for the MIN to win. You know, the forecasters, they look at those MINs on a daily basis, and they're giving away prizes, Avalanche Canada, swag, all different kinds of stuff. There's so much more resources on our website as well, avalanche.ca, the one-stop avalanche shop there. There's MIN reports, there's your forecast, there's weather, you name it. And there are a few people out there when we did those polls that don't have any avalanche education. I really want to prompt you to get some. You know, the best place to start on our website, Avi Savvy. It's a new online tutorial, just got rebuilt. It's a fantastic piece. Get out there, get some education. We really appreciate your folks' interest in avalanche safety. With that being said, you guys, thank you so much for coming out. We would appreciate any support that we can get out there. With that being said, you can donate to Avalanche Canada as little as 10 bucks. You know, you can click on the link in the chat box, go from there. We have, these webinars have been going on all winter. This was number 15. Number 16 is coming up next Thursday, February 25th. Low probability, high consequence avalanches. You have to pre-register for that, folks. And once again, I'd really like to thank Simon and Jennifer and Nancy for the evening, and hope you folks have a great rest of your winter. Take care and good night.
Thank you.